Well, ladies and gentlemen, I cannot wait to introduce you to our panel, so I'm just going to go and do that straight off the top. But first, I'd like to acknowledge the Whadjuk Noongar people, past and present, traditional owners of the land that we're meeting on today, and ask for their blessing on the proceedings of the conference today. So, ladies and gentlemen, today our panel will be discussing family matters, kids safe in culture, not in care. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce our first panellist, Adjunct Professor Muriel Bamblett. Please welcome Muriel. Muriel is a Yorta Yorta Jar Jar Warung woman, did I say that right? Yes. Who's been the CEO of the Victorian Aboriginal Childcare Agency since 1999. She's had a long background in Aboriginal child and family welfare and has received numerous awards for her contributions to the community and for leadership in advocating for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children and families. Muriel's been on the Victorian Honour Roll of Women since 2011, fantastic achievement, and has been a finalist for a Human Rights Medal and the Australian Human Rights Commission. Lovely to be in your presence, Muriel. Thank you so much for being here. Please give Muriel another round of applause. Next, all the way from Canada, we have Dr. Cindy Blackstock. Please make Cindy very welcome. Dr. Cindy Blackstock is from the First Nations Child and Family Caring Society of Canada. She's a member of the Gitxsan First Nation Canada. She's worked in child protection as a social worker for 25 years with particular interest in Indigenous children's rights. Cindy is currently Director of the First Nations Children's Action Research and Education Service at the University of Alberta. Her research interests include structural inequalities faced by children and families, and her work in this area has been recognised for the promotion of culturally based and evidence-informed solutions by many. Please make very welcome Dr. Cindy Blackstock. Our third finalist is Judge Matthew Myers. Please make Judge Myers very welcome. Now, Judge Myers was appointed to the Federal Circuit Court of Australia in 2011, and he is Australia's first and only Indigenous Commonwealth Judicial Officer. That in itself deserves a round of applause. He holds a bachelor degree in Arts and Law and has postgraduate qualifications in Family Law and Family Dispute Resolution. So thank you very much for joining us, Judge Matthews. And our final panellist is a local, Kay Benham, from the Department for Child Protection and Family Support. Please make very welcome, Kay. Kay's worked in a variety of positions in the public sector for over 20 years, including managing victim support, child witness and family violence services, before returning in 2010 to take up her substantive position as Executive Director of Policy and Learning in the department, where she began her career in child protection. Thank you very much for joining us, Kay. And Kay, your boss, the Minister Helen Morton's going to slip in quietly if she's not already here. Oh, there you are, good timing. Thank you very much for attending, Minister. I know you can only give us a bit of your time, so thanks very much. Kay will represent the department, don't you worry about that. Now, we might start with giving each of you a chance to give an opening address. Judge Myers, we might start with you. What's your experience and how important do you think this topic is, kids in culture, not in care?
Look, I think it's enormously important. You've got to look at the statistics. You've got to say, I'm from New South Wales. In New South Wales, there are over 6,000 children living in care. I should say 6,000 Aboriginal children in care. It's 1 in 10 Aboriginal children. 10% of the Aboriginal child population in New South Wales tonight will live out of their home, often off country, most of the time not with their family. If you look at the statistics of Indigenous juveniles in detention, it's 50%. 2.2% of the current population in this country are Indigenous youth. Half of the jails are full. Half of the children in those prisons is Aboriginal. It's not good enough. We are facing the next stolen generation. This is a lost generation I believe, as I sit here today, that in 20 years' time there will be another Prime Minister of this country apologising to our mob. And we've got to do something about it. The time is now. The issues are real. I think the removal of Aboriginal children into care is the biggest issue facing our people today.
Muriel?
I think the biggest danger we have is that we focus on the families that are not doing so well, and that we know that 80% of our families are doing really well. And my major concern is that we're not building on the strengths that we have in our community, and culture is what's made us strong and resilient and brought us through and being able to survive. And I think it's the 80% that will be able to work with the 20% that aren't doing so well. And we need to really think about the 80% that are doing well, how do we actually make sure that we're the ones that are there for the 20%, that we are looking at what we have culturally to make sure that the 20% don't lose out on that, don't miss out. I think it was tragic today to see somebody that doesn't know who they are and where they come from, because I know that it's my culture that's made me the person I am, knowing who I am, where I come from, having a strong identity, having strong aunts, uncles, strong siblings, and strong family all around me, and strong community in Victoria. I believe we have a strong Aboriginal community. We have that, and that's the 80%, and we know that children that are thriving and doing really well are getting good access to education, doing really well. And I think that most of Australia focuses on the 20%, and that's what gets the headlines, the families that aren't doing so well. And that's not to say we do, but it isn't Australia, it's all of our responsibility. And I think this conference really highlights what we're doing well and how great we're doing out there, and we should really celebrate that. The fact that we do have, people that are in the justice system that are kicking goals. But I've heard so many stories here, and I think people will continue to hear them. And having people come from, overseas and say, "Wow, you're doing great here," instead of, "Wow, you people are, you're in the overrepresented," and no disrespect, but overrepresented in prison, overrepresented in the criminal justice system. I think we've got to not focus so much on disadvantage, but focus on what we add to this country.
Thanks very much, Muriel. Cindy?
So good morning, everyone. I don't know what neglect is. I have been doing this for over 30 years. 13 years as a frontline child protection worker, and then I've moved on to other areas, but always working with children in child protection, and I still don't know what neglect is and who's responsible for it. And it's an important question both in Canada and in Australia, because that is the leading reason why Aboriginal children in both countries are removed by their families. But when we unpack neglect in Canada, what we find is that it's caused by factors that are outside the source of families to influence on their own. Things like poverty, inadequate housing, multi-generational trauma and substance misuse related to the state-sponsored residential school system, and probably most importantly, because of the child protection system's neglect and failure to address those causes that are driving those kids into care. Instead, we take the easy route out. We try to codify those problems that are really societal problems, and we lay them squarely at the feet of the parent. And we never ask ourselves, what can that parent or that caregiver actually do to change that risk? And if they can't change it, what are all we going to do about it? Because we are removing children from families for reasons that they often can't do anything about. And that's why I'm a very big critic of structured decision-making models or risk assessment models, is because they never ask that question. Is the parent the one neglecting the child, or is it the state? And in my view, it is the state that is neglecting our kids. And we have to understand that. We have to understand that because back home in my country, Between 1989 and 2012, we had data about the number of nights that First Nations children are spending in foster care. And as the judge so eloquently put it, you can say that in a variety of ways. You can say it's 12 times more likely that a First Nations child in Canada will end up in foster care, or you can think about it the way that children themselves would think about it, which is how many nights till I see my kokum? How many nights till I see my dad? Between 1989 and 2012, if you added up the number of nights that First Nations children on reserve in Canada and in the Yukon Territory spent away from their families, it's over 66 million nights. And that number increases by 9,000 every day the child protection system doesn't act on the fundamental things it needs to keep kids with their families, and that, I submit, is neglect. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I'd just firstly like to acknowledge the Noongar people, the traditional owners of this land, and pay my respects to elders past, present and future. I'd also like to acknowledge my fellow panel members, and I've been asked by Emma White, who's the Director General of the Department for Child Protection and Family Support, to pass on her apologies for not being able to be here, only because of ill health. But she's well on the road to recovery, and she sends her very best wishes to everybody here for a successful and productive conference. I think just my opening remarks, follow on from those of my fellow panel members. I think what this is all about is all of us, everybody working together. We as a department have to step up, and we are, into this space around supporting particularly Aboriginal people to work. We need to work together, both in developing the solutions and in implementing them. And our department is currently in the middle of a reform which is putting squarely the overrepresentation of Aboriginal children in our system right in the middle of everything we do. It is our strategic priority. It is children, families and communities that are in contact with the child protection system, and we need to do something about it at every level, and we need to work with Aboriginal children, families and communities, Aboriginal organisations, non-Aboriginal organisations and every level of government to be able to address this issue. Thank you.
Okay, I'll just keep the microphone there. Judge Myers was saying that 10% of Aboriginal children in New South Wales are in care. What's the stat like in WA?
Our statistics are certainly sobering. 52% of our children in care are Aboriginal, and that is unacceptable in any way you look at it. On a population, per population, our rates are one of the lowest overall. However, when you look at the stats in comparison to non-Aboriginal children, Aboriginal children are 15 times more likely to be in care than non-Aboriginal children. So while we think we're doing some things well, and picking up Muriel's point, we need to really focus on the strengths. We can't deny the fact that we have to do very much more.
And of those children in care, how many are placed with other Aboriginal families or within their own culture?
Yeah, 68% of our children are in care with Aboriginal people. That's mostly extended family, other Aboriginal organisations and community placements. So we're probably about middle of the road in Australia in terms of the number of children who are placed with Aboriginal carers. But we've got a long way to go. We want to push much harder on identifying and most importantly supporting relative carers. And that is very much a central plank of our out-of-home care reform.
Judge Meyer, you were saying earlier that the stat is a little bit different in New South Wales in terms of children being placed within their own culture.
We don't see in New South Wales a situation where there's a big number of children being placed with family members. And people talk about, look, we place them with other Indigenous families. In my view, it's not good enough to take a child out of Redfern and place them up on the Queensland border. It's not, and say, well, they're in a cultural placement. No, they're not. They're off country. It's not their culture, it's not their family, and it's not good enough. It really isn't. It's think about the impact on the child. You've got the child. Let's call the child, I don't know, call him Johnny. Johnny's at school. Johnny's got a family. Mum and dad are falling apart because of maybe drug and alcohol issues or whatever it might be, mental health issues. They've come from a background where their parents were part of the stolen generation. Their parents don't know how to parent because they've never seen a parent before. They've got multi-generational trauma. They're really struggling. They're falling apart. So Johnny's removed. Johnny's been in school. Johnny's placed at a new place and he's not happy about it. He's really, really upset. I miss mum and dad. I love my parents. And he's placed with a foster carer who's paid to look after him, who Johnny starts to muck up and they get sick of Johnny. Johnny, go back. But you don't go back to your family, go to the next foster carer. So you've already been from one school to two because the first foster carer isn't in the same neighbourhood. So Johnny gets to go to the third school. And by this time, Johnny's had a gut full of it. And he's really, really upset and he's starting to get angry. And he starts to muck up on his foster carers. And they say, you know what, Johnny, too much. I've had enough of you too. So off to the next school. And by the time he reaches about school number 4, he's really had enough. So he starts to muck up at school. He starts not to attend. He falls into a bad crowd. And the next thing you know, for the first time in Johnny's life, he's in touch with the police. And then all of a sudden he gets locked up. So he forms one of those 50% of the children in incarceration in this country being Aboriginal. So all of a sudden he's inside. And what happens when you go into jail? Do you get rehabilitated? No, you get taught how to be a better criminal. So when Johnny graduates out of being in incarceration, he ends up in this country as one of the 1/4 of the population in jail being Indigenous. And that's the drama. Take the child out of the family, take the child out of the community, take the child out of its school, take it out of its circle. It doesn't work.
Cindy, what's the experience like in Canada?
I think that we have many of those same track lines. There is no risk assessment done about the risk posed by the child protection system in Canada. We only do risk assessments on families, but we don't ask ourselves if we have something better to offer, and in many cases we don't. That's the real reality of it. And I would like to see in our country that we do risk assessments on the child protection system. And if it is a better option for the child, then let's go for it. But in many, many cases, we're going to find it isn't. And that calls for the types of actions that Muriel's talking about building on culture and the judge and yourself as well. I would say that these are solvable problems. And one of the things that we're excited about in Canada is increasing the training of social workers on poverty, poor housing, substance misuse, and multi-generational trauma. Because right now, our child protection system and our employees are simply not trained up on that, nor do they have the resources to deal with it. And a program in the United States, what they did is they took $15 million, which is a small amount of money for the United States, a small amount of money for this country even. And what they did is they allowed social workers to give out housing vouchers to families who are at risk of losing their kids to child protection. That could be up to $14,000 in value. It could be to get rid of black mold contamination. It could be first and last month's rent. It could be to rehabilitate a bathroom for a child with a disability. What did they find out? For spending that $15 million, they saved 7,200 kids from going into foster care and saved the U.S. taxpayer over $135 million. Wow. So we know what we can do to do the right thing. We simply have to get about doing it, and we have to stop throwing our hands up in the air and saying poverty is someone else's business. Poverty is the business of our families, and that makes it our business. And we have those solutions, so let's do it.
Very well said. Yeah, I think the key is definitely early intervention. And Muriel, you were talking earlier, and you were saying getting to the heart of knowing who you are and what your culture is about is part of that early intervention.
Look, I think that the biggest issue that we have in child welfare is kids not having a culture and the impact of intergenerational abuse, colonisation has severely impacted on a number of our families. And I think that too many of our families have their uncles and aunties, people that are really important to them in the prison system. And so building on a cultural base for families in the child welfare system, and a lot of our families not only suffer from poverty of money and material things, but poverty of culture. They don't know who they are, they don't know where they come from, and so the Aboriginal child welfare system is also about restoring that cultural connection and understanding the value of culture and building that back. Because if you've been in an institution, if the institution's been your parent, if you've been never known who your parent was, not knowing your community, not having those links is as much of a risk and doesn't come into any risk assessment around how that informs how you attach, how you connect, who you are. And having a strong cultural base is really important to Aboriginal people, particularly in child welfare.
So we have another generation, not a whole generation, but a group within the generation who feels that is their identity and their culture, going to prison, doing all those things that are negative and will send them on that wrong trajectory. They think that is what it means to be an Aboriginal person, and it's not. And
it's not. It's definitely. I mean, I think that, and we all know that a lot of our Aboriginal people have public housing, and a lot of our people think that poverty is inherited, and that's the way that I should go. My mum didn't work, my grandparents didn't work, my family have been in prison. The issues that are entrenched in poverty and the conversation around poverty, is poverty a right of Aboriginal people? And so if I don't own a house but I've been in public housing, the attachment to that house and that home and the memories, but if it's public housing, it's not your house. So we've got Aboriginal people that are locked into a public system of living, and so a public system of child protection, a public system of housing, a public system of service system providing for Aboriginal people. And I think we've got to break that nexus, because I think it's important that our people know that they have rights to a system, not that that's their punishment. If you do if in order to get help with your parenting, you've got to be referred by child protection. But every other Australian knows that it's their right to get support and help from a helping system.
That is such a leap, though, isn't it, to go from being welfare dependent, and I guess if I can go so far as being the victim, I guess, that sort of mentality, to suddenly then accepting help from people that you've been suspicious of over generations.
And I think that's the mindset we have to change for our people, that we have rights before the service system, and we shouldn't have to have the child protection system direct us to getting help and being able to get help. That if our families are struggling, if there are family violence, drug and alcohol issues, that they have rights before the system to be able to get help much earlier, rather than waiting until you fall off the cliff, child protection comes into your house, and all of a sudden you've got drug and alcohol, you've got mental health. And if you look at all the stats in Victoria, 80% of children coming before child protection are for family violence. Do we have a family violence response? Mental health, drug and alcohol, do we have responses? So not only poverty, but all of those big ticket issues. And the danger is that we have families that we're unable to help, but all we can do is try and make the child safe at the moment, but we don't have the systemic response.
Kay, I think you've got something that you wanted to add there.
Yeah, very much so. I couldn't agree more. I think the way really that we need to turn this around is by putting more effort, more resources into early intervention. And it's got to be the right kind of intervention, and it's got to be intervention that is owned and delivered by Aboriginal people. Yeah. At the moment, a tiny proportion of the out-of-home care placement money and the prevention services is going directly to Aboriginal community-controlled organisations. And we really need to look at that in the way we invest money into the community sector in a way that supports those kinds of services that we know are effective when they're designed and delivered by Aboriginal people themselves. I also, though, in saying that, I think we've got to do this in partnership so that those Aboriginal agencies, we develop the capacity and we support them to be able to provide the services within the contractual framework that we have. If you like, there's no point in setting up agencies and individuals to fail. So we need to do that, and we need to find new ways of being able to do it in ways that are culturally secure and culturally responsive. So we will be looking to do that over the next phase of our reform, and really wanting to work in partnership in that way to make a difference.
Okay, you must, picking up on what Cindy was saying with, I guess, putting a fairly small amount of money into the investment for the early intervention will save so much more. I mean, you must see that all the time. The families that come across the department's books when it's too late, pretty much. And you could see that if you'd got them earlier, it would have been so different. Yeah,
I agree. I mean, the Department for Child Protection, in many ways, is very much a downstream agency. It's not to deny our responsibility in working in this area and doing things in a different way. But we are downstream. We need very much to link up better. I do think, and there's some of the work that's going on at the moment around particularly our regional and remote reform program, there is a lot of money out there. There's a lot of money for services, but it's either not targeted or it's not well used in terms of getting the services to the people who need to get them in a way that is helpful for them and their families, to keep them out of the child protection system, the prison system, and so on. So I think it is a matter of us really stepping up in this and looking at the way we do things in a different way, and working together in a very real way. I know that there's a lot of platitudes around that, and I don't want it to sound disingenuous, but we all really do need to look at the way that we are linking and delivering and really designing the services in a different way.
Muriel, you wanted to say something?
Just quickly, last night, or yesterday, I was speaking with Megan Mitchell, the Australian Commissioner for Children, and she was talking about an American model where in America they're getting great results and it's not about, it's in a system where the Department of Human Services, before they can put an order on a child, or the government instrumentality, has to demonstrate what they've done to keep the child at home. And I think our responses have to be, what are we all doing to keep children in the home, rather than what are the risks that are keeping the children, that should inform the system taking the child away. And I think we've got to turn the system back and stop taking children, and we have to be able to demonstrate to the court that we've done everything we possibly can to keep that child safe, and the only other option is to have the child placed on an order, but we've still got to demonstrate. And their system is rewarding services that keep children out of the system, so you get more money if you keep children in the parental home. I think we've got a system that actually works the other way and is funding us to actually keep children in the system, and I think we've got to turn it on its head. It makes much more economic sense to, the economic rationalists by, saving money by, and no one wants to go down that economic rationalisation path, but the reality is that it makes perfect sense for children to stay in families, and that's where we need to do the work. But I don't want to go past the important point too, that in all of this, our child protection system in Australia is a very, feminist, and it's really aligned to women, and I think that we often forget about the role of men, and I think that we need to think about how we preference women and the women's family, and and the work that we do is often aligned to the women. I know that there are men, and strong Aboriginal men in the room today, who've come to this conference to really pursue as well the fact that men have a role, and I think that we need to recognise too that our Aboriginal children need men, and all the research on evidence says that men that are involved in children's lives actually do better.
Well, Judge Meyer, I might come back to you and your experiences in the family court. how important is it to maintain that male role model? What's your experience in terms of what the discussion that we've just been having?
I come from from the Federal Circuit Court, which does about 80 to 90% of all the family law work in this country. My court is a private court. People might say, what's a private court? In my court, you are not taken to my court by the Department of Family and Community Services or a child welfare agency. You're not taken to my court by the police. My court evolved out of basically mums and dads' needs to sort out some arrangements for their children following the breakdown of their relationships. But as a result of the legislation that I work under, my court also has a lot of the same principles that you might see in a child welfare court. That is, the paramount consideration is the best interest of the child. The interesting thing about my job, when I first started it, I said, look, I wasn't given a magic wand to fix anything, and I haven't got a crystal ball to see into the future. And really, if you distill down what I do as a job, really, when it comes to parenting, I pretty much just make orders about time, how much time children spend at most places. Spend time with mum, spend time with dad. Globally, though, in our court, that is the Federal Circuit Court, the Family Court, and the other courts of my type around the globe, we've realised that we can't just sit back and just divide up time. It doesn't work. And there's been a shift to what's called therapeutic jurisprudence. And I don't know whether anybody's heard of that term before, but what it means is, in my court, we've actually got to look at what's the real problem. What can we do with mum and dad? What can we do with the family? So if I took a snapshot, say on day one I had the kids and the family come to my court, well, not necessarily children, but the family come to the court, and I took a snapshot of them, I'd see mum and dad with maybe, I don't know, if it's dysfunctional, mum and dad with some drug and alcohol issues, maybe some mental health issues that are going unaddressed. Do I just make orders about those parents today? And in my view, the answer is no. In my court, the answer is no. What we've got to do is employ therapeutic jurisprudence. Look at what can we do to take a picture of what mum and dad look like today and move them to what mum and dad should look like tomorrow. And that's when keeping kids safe in culture, not in care, comes in. How do I take an Aboriginal family and look after them? I get their grandparents involved. I get their aunties and uncles involved. I say, mum and dad, you need to work on yourselves. We need to do some work with you. We need to, if you unaddressed mental health issues, we'll get a mental health plan in place. Drug and alcohol issues, look at residential rehab. Whatever we've got to do, let's get you back on track. But we're going to keep your kids safe in your culture, place you with maybe your grandparents. And that's the great thing about my court. Grandparents have got an absolute right to come to my court. Nobody can say you have no right of appearance. In most of the welfare courts or children's courts of this country, a grandparent has no right of appearance. They must go to the magistrate or the local, whoever's looking after the children's court, most of the time a magistrate, and say to the magistrate, please sir, may I be heard. In my court, you don't need to say please sir or anything. You have an absolute right. All you need to do is come to the bar table and you are there. And that's the difference in my court. But going back to the 80%, if there's a family in crisis, don't leave it. We know, I know if there's a family in crisis in my community, rather than sitting back and hoping things get better, and they generally don't, waiting for the department to take the kids, act early, come to my court. Come to my court and say, we need to do something about it. I can make orders and place the children with the grandparents, with aunties and uncles, in their community, in their culture, not somebody else's culture, not 1,000 kilometres away, while we work with mum and dad. And I'm seeing a big change. I'm seeing that starting to work in my court because the message is starting to get out there, because in my view, the child welfare system doesn't work. It doesn't work for our families. We need an alternative, and in my view, the alternative is using the federal family law system, but you've got to use it quickly and you've got to use it at the beginning. You can't wait.
We have 4 microphones in the aisles here. If anybody would like to jump in and join the discussion, ask a question or share an experience, you're more than welcome to do that. I wanted to pick up, if anybody does have a question, I'll give them a few moments. No, not yet. There's a microphone just behind you there. You can jump up.
Hello, I work as an educator in Northern Territory, and And from an educator's point of view, I see the end result when the child has come into protection, and a number of times I've had children in my care that have gone back to kinship, and then been re-neglected or re-abused, and then come back into care. And I try to work closely with parents and reconnect so that we can have a relationship and build on that with their child. And I think the department is at the end of the line, and a lot of the time it needs to come from community and, you know, working within communities so that all of these issues can be readdressed before the 5-year-old gets down to 13 kilos. You know, I think department is at the end of the line, and that's great, and they do their job when it comes down to that. But before that actually happens, there needs to be a lot more intervention in community, and a lot more education and support for people to be able to speak up and talk about, you know, the issues that are in community. And for people in the community not to be afraid to come forward and say, you know, that child is not being looked after, you know, let's work together and help before before department is then called.
Thank you for that. Muriel, did you wanted to address that?
Can I say that in 2010 I did the Northern Territory inquiry, and what an amazing experience for me. I was so jealous, to be truthful, because to see such a vibrant culture, to see people speaking language, it was an amazing experience. I walked out of that much richer in culture and understanding the Northern Territory, but and to me, I think that what we saw, and the worst, we saw the best of things, but we also saw the worst of things. But the thing that I didn't see was the involvement of Aboriginal people on the ground in coming up with solutions to their problems. And so a lot of, you know, an example, Tiwi Island, the business manager there showed us that 83 services a month fly into Tiwi Island. So mental health is flown in, juvenile justice is flown in, every type of service is flown in. How does that build community capacity to address your own issues? And I think to me, it's a disempowerment model. It's about going in, getting the skills and going out. In the Northern Territory, we also said very committed non-Aboriginal people, doctors, teachers, everybody that had, you know, it was contagious. You could see that people were really committed. The Aboriginal people there were really those saying to us, let us come up with our own response, with our own solutions, and stop coming and telling us what you're going to do for us. So I think that we have amazing potential in the Northern Territory, but we've got to build from a strong cultural base. I think we want to take a Western system and bring it in and just plunk it into the Northern Territory, which won't work. What will work in Victoria will never work in the Northern Territory, because the diversity there is so you can't fathom it, you cannot understand it. It is so complex. And I don't just say that should happen in the Northern Territory. I think there are parts of Western Australia, to me, that get left out of the publicity and that we don't know about, parts of Queensland, parts of the APY lands. I think that Australia really needs to come to the position that we have distinct Aboriginal communities and we should invest in, and we should understand what does self-empowerment, self-management and self-determination mean.
Cindy.
I want to say that the Bringing Them Home report is not just informative for people here in Australia, it informs those of us around the world. So we thank you for sharing your stories, and it reinforces the power of community-based solutions. I look at this panel, and if I was an Indigenous or non-Indigenous child in Australia, I would look at these wonderful people and I'd realize that I could grow up to be a journalist or a judge, or the head of one of the best organizations in the country serving children. and I would hear people saying that they want to hear the voices of Aboriginal people. And then I would see government contracts saying that Aboriginal people can no longer speak up for their own kids and lobby because we don't want to fund that. If we really want community-based solutions, we have to understand that Aboriginal people are the ones who need to be funded and supported for speaking up to their children because they have the solutions to do it. And the rest of the system has to have the courage to stand in front of that feedback, be it complimentary or critical, because it's not about protecting anyone's reputation, it's about doing the right thing for the kids. And I'd like to see the governments draw that back and allow I want to see a generation of Aboriginal children in this country looking up and seeing every Aboriginal adult speaking up for them. And that's something that the government encourages and doesn't try to quash.
Cindy, you raise an interesting thing, the Bringing Them Home report, and the fact that it's used overseas. But it's interesting here in Australia that the rates of removal have increased over 400% since the Bringing Them Home report. So it's great that it's being used overseas, but perhaps it should be used more within our own
I think
country.
what we're seeing there are recommendations that aren't being implemented, right?
Yeah.
And we have lots of commissions like that back in Canada. We have the solutions. We just simply have to do it.
How can we give communities the confidence to speak up, you know, without fear?
One of the things we do back home is we actually engage the children themselves. Children know what it's like to be growing up in home. They want to grow up in home, whether they're in care or not. And so every Valentine's Day, we invite children all over Canada to send Valentines to our Prime Minister so that First Nations children can grow up safely in their families, be healthy, get a good education, and be proud of who they are. And we were wondering if any kids would participate, but now the Prime Minister gets about 100,000 Valentines every year. And when I share this story here in Australia, I'm just going to ask the AV people to show up a slide. People tell me, well, that would never happen here in Australia. But you can see it is happening here in Australia. And I don't know if Jackie is here from SNAICC, but you can see her at the booth. And wouldn't it be great for the new Prime Minister to get hundreds of thousands of Valentines from every kid in this country saying that everyone deserves to grow up with their family, their culture, and their mom and dad.
Excellent. We've got heaps of people asking questions.
Yeah, good morning. My name is Barbara Shaw. I come from Alice Springs and I live in a town camp. I've actually lived under the Northern Territory emergency response now for going on 8 years, which is the intervention, of course. Now the honeymoon of that is over. I'm also living under the Stronger Futures, and we here in the Territory, there is a big contingency here from the Territory. First of all, I'd like to say I'm one of the 80% that do the right thing by families and children in Alice Springs. I also work with disadvantaged families, strengthening them as a Women's Committee coordinator for our town camp women, strengthening them, making sure their kids are at home, tackling family and domestic violence, and I have one of my committee members here with me. Yesterday I thought Mr. Chandler did a very good job because he brought my story into this country from another country. And we as Aboriginal people can relate to people in Canada, people in America, because we heard our own story coming from somebody else. And it sort of disappointed me because we have people working on getting statistics, doing reports. One of my good brothers down here is a researcher. He's been working with the grandmothers against child removal. And then, thank you, I hear somebody yesterday talk about how, out-of-home care are good for children, our Aboriginal children. Now you cannot get a non-Aboriginal person teaching an Aboriginal child their own culture. I come from the territory where our Chief Minister and his government accepts that Aboriginal children should be allowed to be fostered out or adopted by non-Aboriginal families and then be removed from their country, their language, their homes, and they could be taken interstate. And a clear example of a lady from here, her children were taken from her home and not seeing their kids after school and then taken to Queensland. This is a clear example of our kids being forcibly removed. And it is. They say it's not, the government says it's not a next stolen generation, but through Aboriginal eyes it is. Because you're actually taking one child and forcibly removing them to another. Now we talk about government departments. Government departments in the territory, they've got this thing called mandatory reporting. Now if they're not looking at families first, after I finish here, I'm going to a funeral and then I have to bring back my grandson and bring him back into my home because his mother is homeless, his mother's in a violent relationship, and the only person that she can ring up and rely on is me as the next of kin. Now we have 70 pages that we have to fill out to become next of kin or kinship carers. Now you talk about little Johnny. I see little Johnnies and little Juliannes running around hanging off the arms of non-Aboriginal people looking at me like, oh, help me, And it's so unfair that our Aboriginal children are running around town with, and our towns and cities with non-Aboriginal people saying, oh, come over here, and it's so unfair that I know these children. These children could be my nieces and nephews, my grandkids, my little cousins, and then with the IAS stuff, the Aboriginal Advancement Strategy, a lot of our money has been cut. You say that there's money out there for Aboriginal and organisations, there ain't. Because once the IAS kicks in and your organisation comes under IAS, we get nothing. We have to have a reshuffle, or there's good staff that have to be redundant because there's no money to keep our employees, especially our Aboriginal workers and staffers to look after our kids. We talk about keeping our children, out of home care. This happened 2 years ago when I was in Cairns. We talked about out of home care then, and we're still talking about out of home care now. And it's still getting worse. So how do we stop it? You say government departments should be working with organisations. They're not working with organisations. They're actually working against Aboriginal families and Aboriginal organisations. And I want little Johnny to know that his grandmother lives down the road or his auntie lives around the corner so they can go and get back into family connections and back to culture. It's not happening with little Johnny.
I want little Johnny to live with his grandmother.
Yes, that's right. And little Johnny could be living right next door to his grandmother, but his grandmother doesn't know that's little Johnny. Because the people that are looking after little Johnny are actually keeping little Johnny away from his own family. I go to the schools. I get very involved with my children because of my children going to school. My children come from the bush and they go to school. They come and stay at my house. I have my little white friend who comes over every now and then when he's in Alice Springs, and he wants to stay with all his Aboriginal friends. Because he knows how good an Aboriginal family can look after their families.
Thank you very much. All of those points are very valid points. Did anybody want to respond to any of those, or should we just go to the next question?
I just want to congratulate. Barb's been a really strong advocate for the Northern Territory, marched in the streets and will continue to march in the streets. But I think that I just want us to implore, how do we do something about it? I come from Victoria. I've done the inquiry up there. I felt really, really gutted when I had to go back to Victoria and didn't see a lot of action. We all feel a sincere obligation to want to do something. We're good-willing, we're people, we've got a heart, we've got feeling, and it's just heartbreaking to come back here every 2 years and hear the same story. SNAICC is now calling for national action. I think, we have to really think about, we talked yesterday about a communicate. We're in a situation of crisis. Children being taken away from their families, placed away from their community, languages being taken away, cultures being decimated. How long can we sustain this? Why do we sustain it in a country where we're supposed to have better rights better access to more legal systems. You know, we've got family law. We've got all these good people. How do we actually make this? And, you know, what's the role of the media? What's the role of politicians? What's the role of legislation, systems, programs? We just can't sustain this forever.
Okay, just picking up one quick point before we get to the next question. Barb mentioned the red tape that she had to go to prove that she was a next of kin. What's it like to be able to prove, you know, that you're a next of kin, or to take a child that you're all related to, say?
Yeah, look, as I said before, we really, our commitment is wherever humanly possible to put Aboriginal children who do need to be removed from their parents with relatives, and to support them. Now, we recognise that we need to do more in this space, and we can do more. We need to, and we've currently, as part of our reform program, looking at the way that we do assess relative foster carers and try to do it in a way that is easier, certainly less red tape, less bureaucracy. Relatives are different from foster carers. They are family, that's what they are. And we need to respond to relative carers in terms of both the way we assess them and support them. And we need to do much more in terms of support, both relative carers in terms of if they're placed with them in foster care. But part of where we want to go is for many more children to be out of care, and out of care at a much earlier stage, using, for example, special guardianship orders, whereby children are no longer in the department's care. But we need to support them. We've had them in place for a while now, but what we have done is we haven't provided support post the orders being made, and we need to be able to provide much more ongoing support, including financial support. We do financially support special guardianship order carers, but we want to do much more practical support as well. So yeah, look, lots to do, and you know, let's try and work out the solutions together. That's all I can say. I completely agree with Muriel. There's a lot of people with tons of goodwill, and we just need to be able to work together and find the solutions with Aboriginal people.
Thank you.
Certainly not.
We've got another question. Did we have another question up here?
Yes.
Yep.
If you could hear me or see me, I'm from Yunamu. I'm a Warlpiri man. My language is Warlpiri. Yes, enough is enough. It's got to stop. Whatever is going on, it's not helping us. We are the gingerbread men to come up to our community intervention. They have destroyed us. We got to stop. It's got to stop. Because it's not helping us. Yambi alungan ba? Ngani ba lo yung nalo? Chongani man. What I'm saying, what I've just said there is, leave us alone. We will work it out.
Thanks, Champion. That was really strong. Yes, I'm Valerie Nabaljarry Martin. I've been fighting this so-called intervention. You know, this is our country. On Friday, February the 13th, we'll be marching on that day, the day Kevin Rudd said sorry. But it's still happening, taking our kids away. They don't even know our culture. Their law changes, but our law stays on and on. They go to the parliament, be elected. And the laws are changing every day right now. But our law, Aboriginal law, still the same to us. Leave our kids alone. So we can deal with their kids. I'm a grandmother with 5 grandkids. Not only that, I look after other families as well, few of us. The system is still there. And it's swept under the carpet. We're battling and battling and struggling for our kids. Leave our kids alone. Don't take our kids. When you guys gonna listen to us? We know how to deal with our kids in our cultural way. Just leave our kids alone. Don't take our kids alone. Yet it's still happening today, taking our kids. After what Kevin Rudd said, sorry.
Thank you very much for those comments.
Hello, my name's Debbie Swan. I'm a Gomeroi woman from Moree, New South Wales, and I'm with the Grandmothers Against Removals. I'd just like to start off with saying everybody in Australia needs to change their mindset. Everybody. Because we live in a world that is of a deficit model whenever we listen and take funding from the government today. You know, like we had a protest last year in February, like Auntie just said. The amount of people that turned up there was appalling to me. People got to start to learn to stand up. You got to start to learn the government's not going to listen to us by ourselves. We've all got to stand up. You all got to stand up. You all got to start going to protest. We have the answers. We have the answers, like Auntie said. But the people listen to us now because we are a community group. We are not an organisation. We are not an organisation that is funded. So we don't really get listened to by the government. So people who work, you need to start changing your mindset and think, what am I doing in my job? Am I doing my job to keep kids at home? Or am I doing my job because that's what the government tells me I've got to do? So people really need it. And we don't trust the government, and we'll never trust the government until we see action. When kids are not being removed and placed with their families, then we can start saying, yes, the government is doing to what we're asking them to do. So people, come to our workshop this afternoon. We'll give you some ideas on how to do that. Thank you.
Hello, my name's Lisa Thorpe, and I'm a Gurna-Chamara-Gunner woman from Victoria. And I don't need to repeat or anything what everyone's just already said, but I just think everyone needs to realise is that what's happening in Aboriginal early years education is appalling, and it's actually going to make all this worse. And if we actually think what's going on with the new system, or do we actually know what's going on, it's actually going to shut down a whole lot of more services, take the control away more from Aboriginal people, and actually make it worse. So we're sitting in this big forum today, and we're talking about the devastation that's happening in welfare. Well, we're still moving forward towards it. We're actually not putting a stop to the process. Thanks.
Thank you. You've been waiting a little while. Yep.
Hello, my name's Richard. I'm from the Victorian Aboriginal Childcare Agency. I just got a few comments to make, and I hope I don't get a lot of egg on my face because Auntie Muriel's sitting up there and she may be able to answer a lot of my questions. But I'm one of 38 staff members within our office, and apart from our IT guy, I'm the only male that works in our office. So my first point would be, how do we get more men involved in our services, given that it's a more natural thing for a woman to be nurturing our children? Earlier this year, I witnessed over 10,000 people march on Melbourne Flinders Street Station around the forced closures of remote communities, which was a great effort, and I fully support that. But in the same time, 4 weeks ago, I sat on a panel of task force of 1,000 children in out-of-home care within the state of Victoria. That has now risen to 1,200 children in care across the state. So I've been working for VACA now this time around for 4 years. Previously, I worked for VACA in 2005, 2003 to 2005. I'm now seeing those kids coming back with their kids, which breaks my heart because it's just a systemic thing and it's a generational thing, which we are finding really hard to break. How do we motivate the community to put a stop to this within an urban setting in southeast of Melbourne, Metro Melbourne, that we have so many kids that are in out-of-home care that I now call, and I feel responsible for our new lost generation. I'm old enough to have heard the stories directly about stolen generations and seeing our families come back to community from being forcibly removed due to past unjust policies by government. And I'm actually now witnessing a whole new lost generation. And how do I answer to these kids in 10 years? What did I do? What did our community do for these kids when they've got no one in 10 years' time? I really want to motivate our communities especially within Melbourne, to get those 11,000, 12,000 people marching on Parliament to say enough's enough. Our kids need to be with their families and our kids need to be home. And we need more men in our services, so that's all.
Thank you very much. I might get you to hold your comments. And we'll just take 3 more questions and then we'll get the panel to wrap up and then the panel can address all of, I think, the comments that everybody has made. I think that's Auntie Glenda up there, is it?
Yes, Narelda. My name's Glenda Kickett and I'm a Wajak Balladong woman from this area. I was involved with the Commissioner for Children and Young People's report last year and did a lot of consultations with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander kids from in Perth right through the goldfields out to the desert. And when I looked at the things that the kids were saying, analysing that data, it was really evident that kids were saying that the most important things to them is family and culture. That's what makes them strong. And that's what gives them their identity. And it was really evident that the strengths are in our communities, are with our families, and the evidence is there. If you read that report, you can go onto the Commissioner's website and read that report. And that's what we need to be working on. That's what we need to be building. Those strengths in our communities, our families, to do the work in our communities with our own families and to build the capacities of our organisations to do that work. And I would like to see that happening here. And I know, right across Australia, and there are some programs that are doing that, that are coming from that strengths-based perspective, but with a strong cultural framework. The other issue for us here in WA is that, there's 53% of our kids in care in this state, and it's rising. Large numbers of sibling groups being referred for placements and coming into care. And we've got to stop that. We've got to try and do some work around early intervention and having strong cultural frameworks to do that work. In the Family Matters Forum last year, we talked about pushing for an Indigenous Commissioner for children and young people in this state. And we've been talking about that for the last 5 years, and we're still talking about it. Or a child advocate for Indigenous children, given that 53% of our kids are in care in this state. So I just want to put that out there to the panel and to policymakers and people here today. Thank you.
Thanks, Auntie Glenda. At the front here.
Yep. Hi, I'm Miranda Bellini. I'm the director of a childcare centre in Shepparton, but I'm also a Noongar from here. I was on the Task Force 1000 with Commissioner Andrew Giacomos, and like a heartbreaking story was this one young man, he's nearly 18, he'd been in 37 homes and he's turning 18 soon, so we'd just set him up to fail. There was nothing after that. So I think a lot of our children that have been wards of the state, and then as soon as they turn 18, and you hear it here in WA, my grandparents were foster carers for over 120 children here, and they will tell you story after story as soon as they turn 18. They come back to Nan and Pops because they've got that love and care, but it's that generational stuff that happened to their parents, and that I just want to know, have we got any supports for these young adults that need to be, you know, have that extra support when they're becoming adults? So, yeah.
All right, thank you. And we'll get one more up the back there.
Yeah, hi, my name's Vanessa Colwong. I'm a Nyunga Nyamaji woman. I'm also part of the Grandmothers Against Removals here in WA, and I advocate voluntarily for families that have kids that are taken away in DCP. Today I'm sitting here and I'm listening for the last couple of days. There's a lot of things that you're saying that are being done, that things that should be done, and that you're profiling the children. And my issue I have right now, listening to everyone, is your reunification. You're putting a lot of efforts into what I'm hearing. The stories coming from the ground on ground zero. It is I'm out there and I'm hearing I get nothing less than 20 phone calls a day, you know, and I've got no resources to do this here. They have no They tell me they have no services that they can go to and seek help from anyone for any issue that they're dealing when their children are getting taken away. Now, you go, from what I understand, the extremes are being put into taking these children away. There's no supports out there. There's more efforts into keeping the children away from the family. What about putting some more efforts into reunification and bringing them back together and building them strong families? You've got words like, there's so many justifications for what you're doing, yet there's no proof of the lowering of statistics. SNAICC is going on 30 years old. I don't know how long you people have been coming together congregating. What, 8 years did I hear earlier? 8 years. The statistics have risen. What are you doing? What are you doing?
Thank you very much. And thank you for all of your comments. I'll just ask you to keep it very brief.
Okay, I'll be very brief. So basically, I'm Swellen Ty. I'm a member of Grandmothers Against Removals. We're from the Gomeroi Nation in New South Wales. We're staunch Aboriginal grandmothers. We've marched to Parliament House. We've called national marches. We've called national action. I see a lot of bums on seats here today, and my mind's heart says you're here for the kids, and I hope that's the case. And so on February 13 next year, we're going to march on Parliament again next year. And I'm I'm challenging every one of you here, including those members on the stage, to come and be present at that march, because we need your voices. We know that what's happening to our kids is not fair, it is not legal. We know that what they're doing is not right. So we need voices, we need your feet on the pavement, we need you there. And if you come to these marches and it's a voice, someone will begin to listen. And it needs to happen now, because the statistics of our kids in care who will then move into the judicial system, and that's the pathway that's been created for these kids, is you need to say, no, not now, not in my country, not in my country, not in my time, never again. That's what you need to do.
Thank you very much. Well, there's a lot of passion in the room. I'm going to give each of our panellists about 45 seconds each to wrap up, and perhaps you might want to pick up on some of the points that have been made. Kay, we'll start with you.
Okay, look, thanks everybody. I absolutely feel the passion and the commitment and the strength in this room and the will to do something to turn this around. All of us want that. There is absolutely no doubt about that. There are so many good people doing so much good work in so many ways, and we need to find a way to build on the strengths, the cultural strengths that are inherent in here, and make that difference. Now, I don't have the answers, the department doesn't have the answers, but I am sure that together we do. As I think was said earlier, we can turn this around. We absolutely can. We've got to find the ways, and we've got to find the ways together. I think this conference is a terrific forum for being able to generate some of that. We've got another, today, tomorrow to do that, and I really look forward to continuing this conversation in a meaningful way to find those solutions to make a difference for our kids.
Thank you very much, Kay. Dr. Myers, I might go over to you now. Sorry, Judge.
No, not a doctor.
Oh, sorry about that.
He's got a PhD on the stage. Look, the drama that I see is this is not on the federal agenda. This is not on the national agenda. I've spoken to people, some people from the federal government. They say it's a state issue. It's a territory issue. This is not a state issue. This is not a territory issue. This is a national issue. If we don't, as I said, if we don't do something about this, there will be, I promise you this, in 20 years there will be a Prime Minister of this country apologising for the second stolen generation. So we've got to do something about it. In my view, I'm going to call for it. We need to do something nationally. We need to have a voice nationally, and we need to go to Canberra, and in Canberra we need to get together, and everybody needs to say, okay, you know what, it's not working. If I took this water and I tipped it like that, whoops, I didn't put it in the glass. Do it again, didn't go in. If I keep doing it, is the water going to go in the glass? No, it's not. This is not working. I need to change where my water is to make this work. This needs to change. And we need to do something different. We need to take a new approach. And in my view, we need to get the federal government of this country to realise this is a national problem. It needs to be on the national agenda. So I really do. I call upon the federal government to hold a summit to do something about this. They need to get everybody here, work out what are we doing well, what are we doing badly, because some people are doing things that are working and some people are doing things that are not, but nobody knows what's going on because this is a big country and we need to get together and we need to do something about it. So I call upon the government of this country to hold a national summit to address the removal of Aboriginal children in this country.
Excellent. Muriel.
I think there's been a lot of takeaway messages, and I think the issue of kinship care, I think we're in crisis in kinship care. I think kinship care is the greatest growth within child welfare. We know that, I've heard people talk about Task Force 1000, 1,400 children in care in Victoria. Between 600 and 700 are in kinship care in the care of the department. So the Aboriginal community doesn't even manage those. So we're saying approximately about 800 of those 1,400 children that are in care in Victoria are in kinship care. Don't get support, don't get reunification. Now we know that when Aboriginal people are in control, there are much better outcomes. Now in Victoria we have had a guardianship project which was around us as Aboriginal people acting as the guardian of Aboriginal children. A cohort of 13 children, 5 of those children went home. They were in long-term care and to be permanently planned to to non-Aboriginal people. We actually took them and found family, and when you do the work with families, you can get children home. We as Aboriginal people can do better than the government. So kinship care we have to really get that on the agenda. Support for carers, support for grandparents, reunification in that area. But at the end of the day, we all have an obligation to protect children. The children that are coming, and today we keep talking about the taking away, but where's our obligation to make sure that children grow up safe and that we're protecting children? So we also have to have a really strong focus on what's our role to protect children. We can't also just keep children at home when they're not safe. We can't return children home when they're not safe. So what's our obligation? As far as leaving care, we know that we need to do better with leaving care, but it disappoints me that there are Aboriginal children in Victoria that are leaving care that aren't getting supported. So I think that the call for action, I think SNAICC's heard a lot. I think we can all support the call for action that SNAICC's put up there, but I think that it requires people of commitment, people of good judgment, and people to actually stand behind. Don't walk away from here and say that's SNAICC's business or that's that person, that's someone else. I think we all have to have a call for action.
Cindy.
I love being in the company of lots of people who are willing to get into trouble for doing the right thing. And we need to get into a lot of trouble because the Kids' Rights Index, one of the most prestigious organizations in the world on children's rights, recently ranked how well Australia is doing for children in this country proportionate to its wealth. And I don't know much about your political system other than you can get rid of a prime minister pretty quick. But I hear some of the same lines around, we're doing everything we can for kids. Sure, we can do a little better, but we're doing really well. Well, when we looked at the overall score for Australia, you rank 48th in the world. That's for all children in this country. So your economy is doing 4 times better than your kids are. And when you look at the sub-index, the one that is child rights domain that looks at legislation, government legislation and government budget, so the proportion of energy that the federal and state governments are putting into children, you rank 111th in the world. So that's not very good. That's better than Canada. We are 79th in the world. So this whole idea that if we have a rich economy, our kids are going to be doing well is simply not true. And that's why we need to really engage all children and all of us in getting into trouble. I'd like to close by a letter, one of those Valentines that was sent to our Prime Minister last year. It's by Jacob, and he says, I hope I have convinced you to do your part in making the lives of these children better, as no one needs to suffer as these children are suffering. If you are unable to fulfill your duties as Prime Minister and effect that change that will better the life of all Canadians, then maybe there is someone out there who can.
Ladies and gentlemen, before I get you to give a round of applause to our panel, I've got a few things I need to let you know about. If there was anything that you found difficult in the discussion that you would like to take further with debriefing to a group or an individual, then we have a healing circle in the northern foyer. If you do need someone to speak to, please go to the northern foyer and approach a SNAICC staff member who will put you in contact with someone. Secondly, please check the notice board near the registration desk for any updates and notices. And for those who have booked to attend the social event at Fraser's at Kings Park tonight, please note that buses will be departing at 6:40 p.m. sharp outside the convention centre. Now, during the lunch break today, you'll have Angela Rule performing in the foyer. And as we go to morning tea, please give our panellists another huge round of applause. Kay Benham, Judge Myers, Dr. Cindy Blackstock and Adjunct Professor Muriel Bamblett. Thank you very much.